Guys, we're going to be reading a book called Enemy Pie, but first we're going to go over some vocabulary words, okay? Who's number 10? Can you read the first one for me? Okay. 15. Who's number 4?
Trampoline strong.
Canvas.
Canvas. Sheet stretched tightly. Used for jumping and gymnastics.
Number 3. Opponent. Okay, I'm going to say that again because that's in our title, right? So enemy is an unfriendly opponent, someone you really don't like as a friend, okay?
Yeah.
Number 7. Okay, read the next one.
Recipe, instructions for making food.
12. Have you ever seen a boomerang before? It's like a V.
No. My brother has one,
Okay,
but it doesn't really work.
Okay.
He's trying to make it.
Number 8.
Which one is the
Ingredients.
items used in a recipe?
Good job. Number 6.
Fully aggressive person who
Intimidates.
intimidates others.
Number 16.
Poisonous.
No, panicked.
Oh, panic. Sudden feeling of fear.
You can go ahead and read this one too if you want.
Poisonous.
Producing.
Producing or acting as a poison. Bad for you to eat or drink.
You've heard someone say, "Oh, that spider's poisonous," right?
Yep.
Number 11.
She's not here.
Okay, number 14. Squint.
Squint to close your eyes halfway,
Either.
either to help us see or because the light is too bright.
You've squinted your eyes before, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're going to read, but first, you guys have this in front of you, your self-assessment while you listen to the story.
Yes.
You're going to listen carefully, stop and think about the questions that I ask you, use the race strategy when answering the questions, and check your spelling, okay?
Yes.
It should have been a perfect summer. My dad helped me build a treehouse in our backyard. My sister was at camp for 3 whole weeks, and I was on the best baseball team in town. It should have been the perfect summer, but it wasn't. John. It was all good until Jeremy Ross moved into the neighborhood, right next door to my best friend Stanley. I did not like Jeremy Ross. He laughed at me when he struck me out in a baseball game. He had a party on his trampoline, and I wasn't even invited. But my best friend Stanley was. Jeremy Ross was the one and only person on my enemy list. I never even had an enemy list until he moved into the neighborhood. But as soon as he came along, I needed one. I hung it up in my treehouse where Jeremy Ross was not allowed to go. You guys see this? He's making his list.
Yeah, that's the setting.
Right.
The
What's the
treehouse.
setting? The treehouse. Okay. Good job. Turn and talk to the person next to you. Why was Jeremy Ross on the main character's enemy list?
Because he was anytime and every time when he had when he was party at his cousin's house, he had a party on a trampoline
Put your thumb up if you guys have talked about it. G. Kaylin, what did your partner say? That's right. Good job. Okay. Dad understood stuff like enemies. He told me that when he was my age, he had enemies too, but he knew of a way to get rid of them. I asked him to tell me how. Tell you how? I'll show you how. He pulled a really old recipe book off the kitchen shelf. Inside, there was a worn-out scrap of paper with faded writing. Dad held it up and squinted at it. Enemy pie, he said, satisfied. You may be wondering what exactly is an enemy pie. I was wondering too, but Dad said the recipe was so secret he couldn't even tell me. I decided it must be magic. I begged him to tell me something, anything. I will tell you this, he said. Enemy pie is the fastest known way to get rid of an enemy. Now, of course, this got my mind working. What kind of things, disgusting things, would I put into a pie for an enemy? I brought Dad some weeds from the garden, but he just shook his head. I brought him earthworms and rocks, but he didn't think he'd need those. I gave him the gum I've been chewing on all morning. He gave it right back to me. What do you think is in Dad's secret recipe? Go ahead.
Just regular pie.
You think it's just regular pie? I went out to play alone. I shot baskets until the ball got stuck on the roof. I threw a boomerang that never came back to me. And all the while, I listened to the sounds of my dad chopping and stirring and blending the ingredients of enemy pie. This could be a great summer after all. Enemy pie was going to be awful. I tried to imagine how horrible it must smell, or worse yet, what it would look like. But when I was in the backyard looking for ladybugs, I smelled something really, really good. And as far as I could tell, it was coming from our kitchen. I was a bit confused. I went in to ask Dad what was wrong. Enemy pie shouldn't smell this good, but Dad was smart. If enemy pie smelled bad, your enemy would never eat it, he said. I could tell he'd made enemy pie before. The buzzer rang and Dad put on the oven mitts and pulled out the pie. It looked like plain old pie. It looked good enough to eat. I was catching on. But still, I wasn't really sure how this enemy pie worked. What exactly did it do to enemies? Maybe it made their hair fall out or their breath stinky. Maybe it made bullies cry. I asked Dad, but he was no help. He wouldn't tell me a thing. But while the pie cooled, he filled me in on my job. He talked quietly. There is one part of enemy pie that I can't do. In order for it to work, you need to spend a day with your enemy. Even worse, you have to be nice to him. It's not easy, but that's the only way that enemy pie can work. Are you sure you want to go through with this? Of course I was. It sounded horrible. It was scary, but it was worth a try. All I had to do was spend one day with Jeremy Ross, and he'd be out of my hair for the rest of my life. I rode my bike to his house and knocked on the door. Why do you think the dad asked Jeremy Ross to spend the day with the boy? Go ahead. You think so they can be friends?
So he wouldn't know that he made the enemy pie and he was coming after him for being mean to him.
Okay, let's see. When Jeremy opened the door, he seemed surprised. He stood on the other side of the screen door and looked at me, waiting for me to say something. I was nervous. Can you play? I asked. He looked confused. I'll go ask my mom, he said. He came back with his shoes in his hand. His mom walked around the corner to say hello. You boys stay out of trouble, she said, smiling. We rode bikes for a while and played on the trampoline. Then we made some water balloons and threw them at the neighbor girls, but we missed. Jeremy's mom made us lunch. After lunch, we went over to my house. It was strange, but I was kind of having fun with my enemy. He almost seemed nice, but of course I couldn't tell Dad that since he had worked so hard to make this enemy pie. Jeremy Ross liked my basketball hoop. He said he wished he had a basketball hoop, but they didn't have room for one. I let him win a game, just to be nice. Jeremy Ross knew how to throw a boomerang. He threw it and it came right back to him. I threw it and it went over my house and into the backyard. When we climbed over the fence to find it, the first thing Jeremy Ross noticed was my treehouse. My treehouse was my treehouse. I was the boss. If my sister wanted in, I didn't have to let her. If my dad wanted in, I didn't have to let him. And if Jeremy Ross wanted in, can we go in, he asked. I knew he was going to ask me that, but he was at the top person, the only person on my enemy list. Enemies aren't allowed in my treehouse. But he did teach me to throw a boomerang, and he did have me over for lunch, and he did let me play on his trampoline. He wasn't being a very good enemy. Okay, I said, but hold on. Why do you think the boy let Jeremy in his treehouse? Tori.
Because Jeremy was being so nice to him.
How was he being nice?
By like teaching him how to throw a boomerang, letting him play on the trampoline.
That's right.
Gave him lunch.
Okay. I climbed up ahead of him and tore the enemy list off the wall. I had a checkerboard and some cards in the treehouse, and we played games until my dad called us down for dinner. We pretended we didn't hear him, and when he came out to get us, we tried to hide from him. But somehow he found us. Dad made us macaroni and cheese for dinner, my favorite. It was Jeremy's favorite, too. Maybe Jeremy Ross wasn't so bad after all. I was beginning to think that maybe we should just forget about enemy pie. But sure enough, after dinner, Dad brought out the pie. I watched as he cut it into 8 thick slices. Dad, I said, it sure is nice having a new friend in the neighborhood. I was trying to get his attention to tell him that Jeremy wasn't no longer my enemy, but Dad only smiled and nodded. I think he thought I was just pretending. Do you think Jeremy's as bad as the boy thought he was?
Nope.
Didn't tell you that?
Nope.
Right? He just said that. Maybe he wasn't so bad after all. Dad dished up 3 plates side by side with big pieces of pie and giant scoops of ice cream. He passed one to me and one to Jeremy. Wow, Jeremy said, looking at the pie. My dad never makes pies like this. It was at this point that I panicked. I didn't want Jeremy to eat enemy pie. He was my friend. I couldn't let him eat it. Jeremy, don't eat it. It's bad pie. I think it's poisonous or something. Jeremy's fork stopped before reaching his mouth. He crumpled his eyebrows and looked at me funny. I felt relieved. I had saved his life. I was a hero. If it's so bad, Jeremy asked, then why has your dad already eaten half of it? I turned to look at my dad. Sure enough, he was eating enemy pie. Good stuff, he mumbled through a mouthful, and that was all he said. I sat there watching him eat enemy pie for a few seconds. Dad was laughing. Jeremy was happily eating, and neither of them was losing any hair. It seemed safe enough, so I took a tiny taste. Enemy pie was delicious. After dessert, Jeremy rode his bike home, but not before inviting me over to play on his trampoline in the morning. He said he'd teach me how to flip. As for enemy pie, I still don't know how to make it. I still wonder if enemies really do hate it, or if their hair falls out, or if their breath turns bad. But I don't know if I'll ever get an answer because I just lost my best enemy. Okay, so lift up your self-assessment. And why don't you read me what the question says?
Question says, what lesson did the son learn?
Okay, so you guys are going to answer it on the bottom half of the pie. Do you see it there? After you do it, you have this in front of you. Make sure you did all 5 of these things. Alexis, do you want to go ahead and read these for me?
I received the performance test question and my answer. I spelled out the words to the best of my ability. I used
Punctuation.
punctuation where needed. I have
Reread.
reread my work. I did my best on this performance.
Okay, so take your popsicle sticks and your clipboards, go back to your seat. I'll put music on. You guys answer the question and then we'll talk about it, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
You answer it right on the bottom of the pie. first thing on, what's the R stand for on your race strategy? Somebody raise your hand and tell me. Tori. Okay. So your answer should what? Have the question restated, right? Yes. Make sure what's the R stand for in your race strategy. Pull it out if you need to. finished answering the question, put the paper back down and do your self-assessment. Oh, it's okay if you didn't do that one because you were done when you started, but make sure you do it for your exit ticket, okay? Did you do all this while I was reading? You know why I was gonna have that here. Up on the door. It's okay, just you don't have to interrupt. I really just wanna make sure you did it for your exit ticket, so when I go back and read it, if you didn't restate the question, then you wouldn't have it checked off, right? You get your name on it, right? Okay, perfect. We're not to discuss it right now. You can take your paper off the clipboard and put your clipboards back if you want to do that while you're waiting for everybody to finish. Okay. If you're reading, go ahead and close it so we can talk about it. Okay, so the question was, what lesson did the son learn? I'm gonna pull it. Number 2. Okay, let's use accountable talk. Do you agree with him? Go ahead, it's open, you can talk.
I agree when someone at Nick on when he said, I put the lesson the little boy learned was that germs was nice at to him instead of me.
Okay. It's accountable talk, go ahead.
I agree with Father and Romeo, but I think
It's okay, go ahead. Read what you put.
I think that I just kind of different from this. I think the lesson that the son learned is don't hurt someone before you get to know them.
Good job. Okay.
I agree with Malachi, but I think that the son learned that he should have given Jimmy Ross a second chance to change the way he acted when he first moved in.
Good job.
And judge somebody by how they act at first.
Have you guys ever
But I
heard
didn't know that.
don't judge a book by its cover?
And also don't judge a book.
Have you heard that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
And you gotta give them a chance to get to know them. Because they might be nice. Because they might had a hard time with something.
Did he really even have a reason to not like Jeremy Ross? What was his reason? Do you remember? It was on the very first page.
Yes. The reason was he didn't invite him to come over, even though Jeremy invited his best friend.
That's right. What did he say? He's best friends with my best friend. That's the only reason why he didn't like him. Do you want to add? What did you put? What lesson did the son learn? Good job. What was the dad trying to teach him with the pie and making him hang out with him for the day? What ended up happening? They became friends, right? How did they become friends? Because they played together all day, right? His dad almost tricked him, huh?
About the enemy pie.
That's right.
But the only, I think the purpose of the enemy pie is from enemies be friends. Make them a pie, and maybe you guys will turn out to be friends.
Yeah, so the book's teaching you to get along with each other and be friends and
Be nice.
exactly, be nice. Good job,
They
guys.
used to say on the way to a person's heart is making food.
Did you guys like that book?
Yes.
Me too.